Hello, my name is Carl Woods and I'm a Part 2 student on Oxford Brookes RIBA Studio course. In this video, I want to explain some of the thinking that drove my D4 design project. This project was concerned with societal and economic collapse and what the nature of a community might be in a post-collapse environment. The brief for this project was entirely open. My initial ideas came from a book by the Marxist urban geographer David Harvey called Spaces of Hope. I read this many years ago. It contained an epilogue where Harvey considered what a society might look like in the context of the collapse of capitalism, how a society might rebuild itself. Harvey's text did refer to the built environment, but it wasn't specifically about the built environment. So I had to think laterally about how I would concretize his ideas in architectural terms. I also had to be critical of his text and took the view that he was too optimistic about the kind of society that might emerge after a collapse. I chose a site on Bull Island, which is an island within Dublin Bay, taking the view that a community inhabiting the city itself would be too dangerous an environment and that they could live on the island while travelling into the ruined city by water to collect any materials that they needed for construction, potentially source food, etc., that was still available. In terms of the resources I drew upon, I relied a lot upon historical precedent. Given the nature of the settlement of post-collapse environment, people wouldn't have access to modern technologies. Defence was also an important aspect of the design, I felt. But I also looked to contemporary architecture. There was a communal aspect to the design, so I examined precedents in modern architecture for communal residential development. For example, Mosai Ginsberg's Narkomfin communal housing project in Moscow. Because the inhabitants of this settlement would be sourcing their materials primarily from Dublin city, which was envisaged as a ruined city, I also looked at precedents in contemporary architecture for upcycling of materials. For me, I suppose the aha moment was embedding myself in the technology, understanding what was possible in a post-collapse environment and what would not be possible given the lack of access to modern materials and modern tools. So in a way, the technology drove a lot of the form and design of the buildings. I didn't make physical models of my project until quite late in the day. However, I did make a pop-up model. This, I think, helped to illustrate the wider context of the scheme, imagining the inhabitants travelling to the ruined city of Dublin. Iterative design means for me testing ideas, whether through drawing, modelling, CAD work. You begin with an idea and you try it out by testing it, and you dispense with ideas that don't work, you try new ones, and eventually you might come up with an idea that does work, and it might be completely different to the idea you began with. I think the example of the parabolic arch here is a case in point. I was trying to create a structure that would allow me two different forms of split-level apartments within a co-living scheme within development. And that's how I eventually came up with the parabolic arch form. And just through experiment, that form then gave me the spatial qualities for the dining area, which I think in the end worked quite well. The advice I recall most from others in relation to this project was from one of the examiners early on in the project, who was quite critical of the historic forms a lot of the buildings were taking. I did feel quite strongly about this, that this was necessary because of the limitations in technology. In the end, I felt I needed to stick to my guns, insofar as the only references that people had living in such a settlement were to the ruined city, which was predominantly an historical city, and the only technologies they could use were historical technologies. So I felt that necessarily drove the character of the architecture. In relation to engagement with tutors and peers, I unfortunately tended to work in isolation. This was because my personal tutor, he was a politician. He was very difficult to get hold of. I think the lesson from this is to choose your tutors wisely. It wasn't necessarily his fault. I knew that this would probably happen, but I've since changed my tutor, and I find my current tutor far more helpful. To conclude, I think the most important advice I can give to other students is time management. It's very difficult to balance commercial work and academic work, and it's important to pace yourself so that you don't end up running out of time. And this is quite an intensive project, and it does require a lot of time. So to wrap up, if you're interested in seeing more work I did in this project, then you can visit my blog at articulate-blog.com. And all that remains to say is I wish you all the best in your own work. Thank you.